Shreyans, thank you so much for being here, man. This is great.
My pleasure. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. So for context, you were my boss's boss at Google,
Yeah,
which is kind of crazy to think about, and it's also kind of crazy to think about that it's been 3 years since that.
yeah.
Um,
Somehow that sounds
3 and a
wrong. I
half.
don't really believe it, but that is true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's there's a big crazy thing that happened in the middle, that we don't need to talk about, but it
Yeah.
definitely distorted the sense of time. And I also felt this sense of kinship toward you because of your creative dispositions and your tendency to think about technology in society and your role of technology in society at a very um, sophisticated level. So I'm excited to chat with you about how that perspective has evolved. And I say sophisticated not to, you know, meaning well articulated, but you really thought about this stuff deeply, is what I meant to
Yeah, because I would describe myself as extremely unsophisticated. I'm trying to be as simple as simple as possible, like the way you're born, right? That's kind of what I'm trying to go back to.
just back to the clean
Yeah.
slate. If only we could come back to the clean slate. So I thought it would be interesting because I think your story is super fascinating, and so I think it would be cool to take a look at your perspective of technology at different stages in life. And so let's begin with I don't know, 13, 14-year-old Treyans and your relationship to technology back then. What did that feel like?
Yeah. I was just in Indonesia 2 weeks ago, and I walked past my old house and like looked at the window where I had my first computer, and the first time I got the internet. And I would say that it took me a few years after having a computer to understand what it was and what it could do or what was interesting about it. Like my first memories of having a computer were like I just liked the feeling of being on it and like the tactile feeling of typing. And I remember just like
Hmm.
typing out things that were laying around me that were written down because I just wanted to have my fingers on it. So it was like a very tactile kind of thing. And like I liked the sound of it. Like I didn't know what you could do with it at all. Nobody around me knew what computers were. My dad bought one. He knew nothing about it. Nobody in my family did. I was the only one sitting on it, like trying to use the internet and figure out what was on it. And like obviously
Hmm.
at the beginning, it's like, well, not maybe not obviously, but in the beginning, it was like, what are the dirty things that I can find? And like that was kind of it. That was the first few years. And then at some point, I met this dude in high school who was like the smartest guy I knew, and he would like when he was not helping me with physics homework, he was showing me what the open source world was about. Like he loved Linus Torvalds and Linux, and like showed me that
Hmm.
stuff and like the power of groups of unknown people, unknown to each other, like building something cool together that could rival like the biggest things that were professionally produced. That was like the beginning of me starting to get excited about computers. And maybe it was like through the lens of what people can do when they come together. That was maybe one of the big ways I thought about what made computers really cool, because that's what open source is largely about.
Hmm.
And I kind of still feels like that is a longer journey we as humans are on. Like we still don't know what the internet can do, and we still
Hmm.
don't know what are the great ways we can collaborate in larger and larger numbers or in more complex organizations. And that was like the beginning of me starting to understand that, like, wow, people can come together and write little bits of things and make this incredible bigger thing. So it wasn't really about the computer or the
Hmm.
code or like assembly or
Hmm.
instructions. It was not about the technical side of it. It was about like the human organization side
Hmm.
of it, which was pretty exciting, against the backdrop of seeing society kind of fall apart. Because
Hmm.
Indonesia in the late 90s, in many ways, like it kind of felt like it was all falling apart, like a 35-year dictatorship coming to an end violently. And everyone that was kind of held together in society by this iron fist, suddenly being able to go at it with each other and starting like being able to compete like politically or in
Hmm.
terms of religions and then like clashing. So that was kind of the backdrop. And against that, it's like, whoa, here's this other completely different way that people are
Hmm.
organized, and it's working out beautifully. And it's fighting Microsoft, which at the time felt like the bad guy.
Hmm.
So that's kind of earlier
That's
being excited about computers and computing and yeah, technology.
um, and it's also as you were describing your relationship to the computer, I was thinking, man, like I remember those first few encounters with the computers and sort of like sitting there and like, oh, what else can this do? But I think about the experience that somebody, that age today has with technology and computers, and it's just so completely different, right? Like you don't have to explore what the internet is. The internet is like thrust upon you,
Yeah.
and everybody's like networked, at a much earlier age and like fully socialized to be networked. And
Hmm.
we saw that evolution happening, right? Like from
Yeah.
a dial internet that you had to sort of like be very scant and very tactical about how you use the internet.
Yeah.
Uh,
The network part is huge because I was in a little island on my
mm,
own, not really connected to any other nodes on the internet
mm,
because I didn't know other people. Like nobody in my family had a computer or had the internet.
mm,
Most of my friends at the time didn't because I was still I was in two different schools where in one of the schools people had it and the whole school was networked, and the other one where I was when I first got my computer was not like that.
mm,
Like most advanced thing I remember doing was like a little bit of logo.
mm. The
I
the
did
turtles.
yeah, the turtles exactly. So like there was nothing else that I learned in that first school. So I really was a little island, completely disconnected from the network.
Hmm.
And switching schools, I became a part of the network, and then things really took off, which I guess is the whole
Hmm.
story of the internet and of humanity right
Yeah,
now. Getting networked and things are taking off. It's amazing.
and there was when I was experiencing this for the first time, that it was this window to um, an exciting, optimistic future where the world could be better if we just thought about problems differently. Like Amazon in the early days, I remember the first time. I don't know. I must have been 12 years old the first time I got an Amazon package that was sent to an address in Miami and then sent to this courier service in Paraguay. I remember, oh my gosh, it's like, uh, and it became this window into way of doing things like differently. Um, that, in me at least, generated the sense of aspiration to go there. I need to be there. What
Mhm.
was that feeling for you? Like, as you were no longer like an early teen, but like thinking about college and education.
Um, I don't know if I'm going to answer your question directly, but the thing that came to my mind was something I think a lot about is how we learn and how a lot of our learning is community based, and we learn the things that are happening around us. And I guess I feel like a little bit, not regret, I don't think that's the right word, but I feel a little bit sad that my first many years of having a computer were in a community where it was not a thing and nobody understood it. It's
Mm,
like the idea that like you were getting packages into Paraguay, like that idea that somebody would do that in my upbringing would be so foreign because like all the
mm,
costs of it would be the things that were considered, or how it was like not the norm would be the next thing that would be considered, and it just wouldn't happen. And I guess it took a while to build up that little bit of community around me that knew about these things, that was excited about it before like I started warming up to it. And I kind of feel like I'm still kind of on that journey where this is
mm-hmm,
another random thing that came to my mind, which is not answering your question, but I remember very clearly the feeling of trying to look under the hood of computers and like finding files or finding programs where like I didn't know what they did, and I would just like struggle my way through it. So another thing in Indonesia is a lot of the software would be pirated, so you wouldn't get it with the book.
mm-hmm,
You would get like a burnt CD, and that would be kind of it. So there's like no box, no instructions. You kind
mm-hmm,
of had to figure it out on your own. And so I would buy software from like the pirated software market and have to figure it out on my own. And like I remember so clearly this, like there was nobody to turn to, and I didn't have the tools then. I didn't have the foundation that I
There's no
would need to
YouTube.
be able to figure it out on my own. Yeah. No YouTube, no existing like memory of solving other problems like that, like
Hmm.
no debugging ability.
Hmm.
And just when I think about myself now encountering a problem, I have so much more confidence that without a manual, I could like do something. But
Hmm.
there are like infinite manuals also available, and I can talk to people about it. Um, I guess I'm my a lot of my thinking right now is about my memories are about that phase of life, which I can just totally forget about it now, actually, because we're not in that world anymore.
Hmm.
But
I
I have
know.
the sadness that I once was in that place where it was just like I was moving so slowly through that world. It was like this beginning part of the curve, and like I'm still kind of got all this to go still in being able to use
um,
technology. But what was your question? I forgot it.
so at some point you're thinking about going to college and you're thinking about integrating these concepts more into your professional life. I can see how in the world of like if you were already into open source stuff and like C++, not C++, Linux, um, open source project, and so I see notes of the revolutionary guerrilla sort of like energy, but I also see the empowerment and the wait a minute societal transformation elements and your nascent sense of agency. So at some
Yeah.
point you decide, all right, I want to do this. What's the story of going from Indonesia to the U.S.?
Right. So there was a third critical ingredient in that whole mix, which was
Hmm.
game. That was a huge
I
part of
was,
my.
I was gonna say, when you were talking about, I don't know what this file does. I remember exactly the feeling of open a video, a pirated video game, and you're like, oh, I know that I need to change the key somewhere,
Yeah,
but I
exactly.
have to
Yeah,
find that.
yeah, yeah. The earliest
Oh, the good
hacking.
old days.
Yeah, well, that was the first place and time I used local networked computing where you could like feel how fast communication across computers could be because it was certainly not on the internet where it was like
Hmm.
dial up, a limited amount of time, etc. But going to an internet cafe where 10 computers were already networked and you could play against your friends, that was like when I really saw how exciting it could be to be in a place where the network was amazing and communication was really fast and you didn't have to worry about download speeds or any speeds. Like you had all
You're
the speed
there.
you wanted. It's like, what are you going to do with it? Um, yeah, games were a huge part of that like burgeoning excitement about computing and computers and wanting to have a better one and wanting to build my own. Uh, all the early id Software games, like John Carmack, I guess, is like a god to many people, but like certainly was to
Hmm.
me back then. Like playing Quake against my friends and Counter Strike eventually. But yeah, the story of going to the US to study computer science, I switched from my first school to the second school, which was largely American run. So that was the first time where I really got access to American media and music and games and software and like people who had grown up with
Culture
computers,
values.
whose yeah cultural values, and people who had a history with computers, whose parents were geologists at like
Hmm.
Shell or something, or at like Chevron, or worked at some other American company who they were based in Indonesia, but they had all this technology at home and they had a history with it. Um,
Hmm.
so that was like a very quick education. Like even I mean, a lot of it happened in school. A lot of it happened through my friends who were like Swedish and American or from Texas and Canada and like very international kind of scene. Uh, so at that point, it became kind of clearer and clearer to me that like the culture that I was moving towards, even in high school in Indonesia, was America. Like I
Mm.
felt very comfortable with American culture and media. Like my accent started to change back then
Mm.
already, um, just naturally. I don't remember ever trying to change it. It just kind of happened. Um, and so it was at some point. It was not even a question where I would go to school. It
Mm.
could be anywhere in the world. Like my sister went to school in Australia. A lot of friends would go to Singapore or the UK, but like America was clearly the place, and computer science was clearly going to be a thing because that was the thing that I was most excited about. Uh, but somehow, even back then, it felt like it wasn't obvious enough because
Mm.
my family hadn't grown up with it, and like I hadn't really grown up with it either. So there was like a little bit of hedging that was still happening, which is, well, it can't just be this thing which is new. This was 2000, the year 2000 is when I was applying, where like the internet was already a
Mm.
thing. You know, it was all already a thing in the world, but not quite fully formed in my mind. So there was a little bit of hedging. So I also did economics. And so it was like, what
Mm.
schools make it good to do both, where like it's easy to do
Mm.
2 degrees, not too burdensome, and like it was within reach of what I could do. And so it was UPenn, do a dual degree. Um, and I remember that I applied to two schools, Berkeley and Penn, and I got into Penn, did not get into Berkeley. That's where I went. It was
Wow, there you go.
kind of simple. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. And moving to the US was, I mean, the most impactful, interesting thing in the beginning was that I moved to the US 2 weeks before 9/11. So that was 9/11 was my first week of college. That was
My
uh,
gosh.
shaped a
Not the
lot of,
best welcome wagon, huh?
yeah, it was wild. With a lot of things, like even the dictator getting overthrown in Indonesia and the riots, like it takes me a few months to really digest the magnitude of what happened, and then to like
Mm.
let it sink in, be like, this is how the world is really different on the other side. I guess partly for everyone, like it was initially scary, but you don't really know what this means. So it took a while for the understanding, and not exactly fear, but like just the weight of what was happening in the world to sink in. It took a while. Like basically all of college was that sinking in process of like the wars are starting now and things are getting crazy. Um, Also, the other really exciting things that happened in the first few years of college were Gmail launched and Facebook launched,
Mm.
both like right in the middle of my college years. Um,
Incredible.
yeah,
And YouTube was not long after, right? Like YouTube was 2004, I think. Um,
yeah, yeah. That was
it,
same time as Facebook.
yeah. Um, so this is it's and I remember going through them, and it felt like things were going to be different. But now on the other side, I don't think anybody could have imagined just how different society would look like, um, given these advancements, right? Like because I remember when you were saying like this was the year 2000, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I remember Windows 2000, and you know, and the frustration of using a system like that, and everything was slow, and I remember Chrome being fast. I remember thinking, oh my gosh, Chrome is fast, and that alone has changed. Um,
Hmm.
and okay, so
I just
culturally, you come from you go for it, go
I just
for it.
remember
No.
another early computing memory that just impacted me quite a lot was Encarta. Encarta
Oh
95.
yeah.
Um, that was really exciting to me. Uh,
Hmm.
Being able to look up anything or be able to explore information and knowledge in just in a rich and random way was incredibly exciting. It was like the first time there were like little bits of video and imagery and like maps all in one thing, and you could carry it around with you. That I spent like in my first 2 years of computing, I spent most of my time typing random stuff and like writing little
Hmm.
things. The next couple of years were all about like reading as much random stuff as I could. still disconnected from the world, but like I had it all with me, and it was really exciting. And yeah, I just saw a picture of the Encarta box cover, and it like brought back
Hmm.
all these feelings. I miss that. I miss
It's
that.
so man. I mean,
Your mind blown.
and that just reminded me of like the computer lab at school that you basically like word processing, Excel sheets, that type of basic stuff. But I remember that we had to save our projects in a floppy disk, and the floppy disks had something like 64 kilobytes of storage,
Hmm.
or maybe 128. I forget, but like, and you'd have to lug your stuff around. Like, thumb drives are a thing of the past now.
Yeah.
People don't unless you're in content creation. Like, very rarely are you going to be on dealing with a thumb drive anymore. You just upload it to the
Mhm.
cloud. um, and okay, so you're in college, you're learning the stuff, you're getting some left brain, some right brain, and also all these crazy things are happening socially and culturally. And then, okay, at some point, the 4 years comes to a close. What comes next? Or maybe even better, what do you think of technology at that point as you're making that decision?
I would say that looking back at my history and technology, and this is probably still how it is today, though to a lesser extent, there's, I think I'm like internally fighting a bunch of forces that I inherited, that like the people around me are kind of pulling me away from those forces in good ways. Like, and so the forces I inherited are growing up as an Indian in just anywhere in the world, not a part of a wealthy country. No, you don't have a passport from a
Mm.
wealthy country that will take care of you. This is again
Mhm.
goes back to this moment in Indonesia where the dictator got kicked out. There were lots of riots. A lot of people got killed, and the big companies and the Western countries chartered planes to evacuate their citizens.
Mm.
India didn't. So you were on your
Mm.
own. So we had to find our own way to the airport. There's like buildings burning, there's tanks. You're driving past neighborhoods where people had been killed, and you're at the airport with like the bag over your head trying to get out of the country. Very clear reminder that your country is not going to look after you. You don't have anyone looking after you. You have to look after your. Um, and my dad would always remind me that we don't have social security, so we are each other's social security, but you really have to take care of yourself. Like, so
Mhm.
finding a safe, reliable way to make money and like do the practical thing is like what you should be thinking about. Like, take
Mhm.
this path. And it was never quite exciting. And so like I was always fighting it in some ways, but more fighting it, like just more resisting it versus like running towards a thing that was like very clear to
Hmm.
me. Um, so at the end of college, it was a choice of like, do I go into the tech world or do I go and solve some other problem? And the other problem that was clear in front of me was we had just received Canadian permanent residence, and I had the chance to go to Canada and live there to become a citizen. So I could finally be a part of a country
Mm.
that would look after me. And the job that I got in Canada was for a consulting company. So it was like I was interviewing at Google, and I was interviewing at this consulting company in Canada, and I got the job. And I remember telling Google, I know I'm not going to take this job even if I get it. So don't tell me if I got it. So weird. I don't know, looking back, like,
You're
what an odd choice.
playing mind games with the recruiter, just like they're like,
um,
"Yo, man, what? Look, check this guy out, man!" It all makes it all the way up to the CEO. It's like, we can't figure it out.
yeah, ever seen something like this? No, we haven't. um, so yeah, I went to Canada and I did this consulting job for a few years, and I got laid off in 2008, and that was like the turning point of
Mm.
coming back to tech. This thing that like I actually cared about is like, well, I did this safe thing. It didn't work out, It was extremely boring. The most fun thing about this job was building these complex Excel models, which is basically programming. It's like
Mhm.
that was the thing I liked the most. I think I should go back to that. And that this is where this like community of people around you pulling you out of your situation came into my life, and like my life took a turn, which is my two closest friends from college started at that time. They spent they lived by the complete opposite rule. They knew that they
Mhm.
never wanted to work for anybody else. They
Mhm.
knew that they wanted to do their own thing and be independent. And they knew that if it took years of struggling and like doing little things and barely getting by, it didn't matter. They needed
Mhm.
$600 between the two of them for rent because they were sharing a small room in Philly. It cost
Mhm.
nothing. So they also like they did all kinds of random stuff. They made a website for a Pakistani restaurant, and their payment was food, free food for a while. So they had like great food, they had cheap rent, they didn't need anything else.
That
So
is
they just
so
did random
fascinating.
stuff and like got by and spent their time finding little projects and gigs and building stuff. And they just spent a few years building more and more things and hanging out together and dreaming about what else they could build. And at some point, they started helping one of their friends with a yogurt shop and like setting up the point of sale system, or like I'm not sure what
Mm.
exactly they were trying to do. But in that process, they got access to the First Data API. The First Data is a credit card processor.
Mm.
And at some point, not sure exactly when or how, they're like, wouldn't it be cool if we could use this to send money to each other? And they
Mhm.
hacked it together. They hacked Google Voice at the time. So they hacked the Google Voice API to get access to SMS. And they had
Mm.
this First Data API to get access to credit card processing. And they put it together and they made Venmo. And for the first year of Venmo's existence, the credit card account that was backing it was for this yogurt shop. And so one day, so they started it. I looked at it. I met up with them in Philly just like to go visit them. And they had this thing and it seemed so cool. And it seemed so much like the way they were living and working seemed so much more fun and so much more free than this consulting job in Canada where I had to wear a dress shirt and shoes that didn't fit me and didn't feel right. And I didn't want my boss's job. And this alternative path felt like complete freedom and a lot of fun to make something new and like just like follow your heart and your mind every day towards something. So I joined them. And that was the beginning of this whole other journey that I've been on. But going back to that yogurt shop, for the first year of Venmo's existence, the credit card processing account was for this yogurt shop. So one day, First Data looked at it and they're like, this thing is doing way
Oh
more transactions
no.
than we expected. And we don't know what the hell it is. So they shut us
Oh
down
yeah. I
and
mean, it's a very clearly it's a money laundering operation. I mean, this yogurt
very
shop can.
clearly. So we
Yeah.
landed in South by Southwest, like about to show it off to everyone. This is like my third month or second month at Venmo. And the moment we landed, we found we had a negative $44,000 balance, couldn't use Venmo. And like the next 3 days was all about like, how do we resurrect this thing that is now dead, temporarily dead? And yeah, exciting beginning
Well,
to.
how'd you fix that? I mean, like, yeah. Now I'm curious.
Well, yeah, the way we fixed it was also kind of wild, which was first we had to convince them that we had a business plan, which we didn't. Venmo didn't have a business plan for 2 years after that. Um, we didn't really know how this was going to make money, and we weren't particularly interested in it at that time. We thought, obviously, everyone in the world's going to use this, and then we can figure it out. Um, but we put together a business plan. It was not convincing. I did so many different roles at the time. I was the engineer, but I also like worked on the model, and then we got somebody better than who knew how to build a business model to build one, and a lot of back and forths, no dice, they don't get it. And then we reached out to our investors, and turns out one of the investors, his dad, used to be the CEO of First Data.
Oh, there you go.
So that's how we got it unlocked.
There
um,
you go.
yeah, that's just how it goes sometimes. Um,
Oh man, that's crazy.
yeah, and
And
then
then I mean, there's go for it.
no, and the next 2 days after that was like out on the streets, sending money to everyone. And in those first few days, we met so many people that were a big part of tech history. I went to a coffee
Hmm.
shop, and Naval came in and sat down, and we spoke with him for a
Hmm.
while. And he offered us money on the spot.
That's
Um,
so cool.
I signed up Tim Ferriss. I sent him some money on the street. We hung out with Gary V, who I don't know what he's doing
Yeah.
these days, but he was out there. Um, yeah, there are all these people in the tech world, in the early tech world, that to me had never been in the tech world before. Just 3 months into the first startup, it was incredible. Yeah, that's all. It wasn't really going anywhere other than that.
No,
Eh,
and there's no need to elaborate any further on just how prevalent a product Venmo is. I mean, like I use it every week at least, if not, yeah, probably every week. And it got everywhere, and it always had that sort of like community spirit, as opposed to something like PayPal that was very corporate and
yeah,
sort of like very quickly it became very corporatized when it became part of eBay and whatnot.
yeah,
And
yeah.
Venmo had a lot more of the peer to peer um,
Yeah, I mean, we would say back
energy.
then, like, Venmo is not really about exchanging money. It's about exchanging a feeling or a memory.
Hmm.
Like that's why the note has always been required on Venmo.
Hmm.
That's what the attention should be on, not on the amount, but like what was it that you were doing and who were you doing it with? And
Oh,
the
it's so
Venmo
fun. Like
network,
I
yeah, the Venmo network is a completely different network than you have anywhere else. It's the people you see in real life and you do things with in real life. And yeah, it's
Yeah,
always.
and transact, like share economic burden together.
Hmm.
And so there's
Yeah.
like implicit trust networks, implicit credit networks. There's recurring relationships. There's transactional relationships. I mean, it's
We
so.
used
I
to have
mean, fascinating.
explicit we used to have explicit trust on Venmo, which was a feature in the early days where you could trust someone and they could pull money out of your account without you approving it.
Oh wow! And you could give them a budget. I'm guessing.
No, it was just
Here's the keys to my Ferrari. Go for
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it.
And like we would trust, yeah, all of our friends. And it was only
Wow.
once Venmo got much bigger um, that somebody decided that this was not okay, and we fought it, but we gave up on that fight. But yeah, trust was a big part of it. It was all about the social dynamics. It was not
Hmm.
about the money. It was that this can help you get rid of a bunch of weird social dynamics and help you focus on the good stuff.
Hmm. And okay, so then you're in it. The rocket ship is taking off. We get to the point where that chapter closes for you, right? Like there's at the any project reaches its conclusion, and so um, okay, so now you've had the experience of being consulting, of like this lifestyle. You've there's all the cultural stuff that you sort of witnessed and now been a part of. What's technology like at that point? Where like at the beginning of the consideration, what's next?
Yeah, and again, like I think mostly my lens on it has not been the technology lens. It has mostly been
Hmm.
the social dynamics lens.
Hmm.
I left Venmo because of the social dynamics. I started my own company because I wanted to build a team that felt a certain way. Like
Hmm.
what we were building was important, but how we were building it was a little bit more important to me.
Hmm.
And that has kind of that is why I've always worked on small teams because I want to build a certain feeling of what it's like to work
Hmm.
with people. Like it's the feeling of being on a great small team where you get each other and you feel like you're skating together. Like that is
Hmm.
largely been what I've been looking for and working towards. So I left Venmo because it didn't feel like that. It felt like the opposite of
Hmm.
that for a while. And there's like an interesting, challenging situation where you're working with people you know really well. And you've known them for 8 years before you started working together. And they're the bosses, but you don't
Mm-hmm.
see them as that. And you feel like
Mm-hmm.
we're at some level we're obviously on the same plane. And I guess I've always had a little bit of a problem with authority. And when it's your two friends who are telling you what to do, it's especially magnified.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there were like weird, challenging dynamics that I didn't want to be a part of anymore. And the team ran a certain way, which had a bunch of merits, but I didn't want to be a part of that anymore either.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a vision, an idea of what a great team feels like, and that a much smaller team than Venmo had could do really great things. And it didn't have to get big. It didn't, like organizing groups of people is pretty hard. Organizing large groups of people where everyone's in it for a slightly different reason and they're all arguing with each other and like you don't have a good way to get everyone on the same page is even harder. So I wanted to simplify it and make something that felt great to be a part of every day. That's why I started a company and just happened to meet people along the way who thought about it similarly. And we wanted to solve the same problems.
Mm-hmm.
And education
And
became
it's
bigger.
really, before we jump, because I think that's the part of the story where eventually I click into. Um, but there's an important note there that is like working with people you love. It does, like, there's, you can't be under the illusion that it's not going to change the nature of the relationship. You're at least going to be wearing masks or hats at some percent of the time, and so then it does affect your relationship with that person, the cost of that mask, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or putting it on or switching it or whatever it is. But if I recall correctly, you also persisted the relationship with your friends, right? Like, you're still close with them.
Yeah, still close with them. And it took probably a little bit of time after that parting
Mm.
for it to come back.
Mm-hmm.
And while we were in it, I just don't think I had the wisdom to know that I should have a mask on or that I can't just.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like I've learned that lesson in two different ways. One is at Venmo, where I had to realize that I was the employee and I had
Mm-hmm.
certain responsibilities, and there were certain things that were not in my purview. I should leave them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you can't fight that order too much until you've
Mm-hmm.
earned it. But you can't just expect that you
Mm-hmm.
have it for this other unrelated reason that you're friends. The second way I learned that you have to know what role you're playing and you have to play the right role.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I also learned that a third time at Google in a different way. But the second time was when you're the founder of a company, the employees of the company will see you a certain way. And they don't necessarily see you as a person just like themselves. They don't necessarily care that, well, you're just human and you just have emotions, so it's okay if you're upset. Or,
Mm-hmm.
you have to be a little bit more measured, a little bit more careful about what you say and what you don't say and how you say it and how you don't. You can't
Mm-hmm.
just go in there and just be yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to know what role you're in and what the dynamics are and what other people expect of you. And you have to play that part a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I've
No,
generally
totally. I mean,
having to play a particular part that was given to me.
yeah, exactly. Like that, you didn't have any license in creating, right? Like, I think there's just like
Mhm.
a box of expectation that you're sort of like, okay, so you leave Venmo and you have an idea of the space that you want to tackle. And I know this part of the story, but I would love to hear it again. I don't think I know the connection between you and Chris. I don't know how that happened.
Yeah. I left Venmo knowing two things basically that I wanted to work somewhere in the learning education space. It felt like just this huge open space where nothing particularly exciting was happening, but it affects everyone every day, like really impactful and largely untouched. and very personally important to me because,
Hmm.
I mean, it's important to everyone. Everyone has some
Oh
kind of
yeah,
story
I
of
mean,
why education matters a lot to them.
the
Like they had a
Encarta
great,
example I think is perfect. Yeah.
yeah, you have a great teacher or you have a great friend who unlocks this thing, and your whole life turns in a different direction. Well, so I knew I wanted to work in education, but not which problem I wanted to solve. And I knew I wanted to work on a small team. And I wanted to, maybe this is like a bit revisionist history where like I knew I wanted to work on a team that felt a certain way, but it didn't have to be that I started it.
I
And
see.
looking back now, it feels like obvious that I would have started a company at that point. But I started off by looking for small companies to join. And in New
Hmm.
York in 2013, in education, there were very few
Hmm.
that had the feeling of a team that I wanted. But there was this one team that a lot of really cool people were on, and they seemed to always hire great people. And I went and interviewed there to
Hmm.
be a head of engineering. And the guy who interviewed me, like we both pull out our notebooks, we're both taking notes, we both have like the same vibe, we're like joking in the same way and talking the same way. We're like immediately hit it off. And that was Chris. He was the guy
Hmm.
interviewing me. And the day after the interview, oh, also in that interview, I remember arguing with the current CTO about his interview style or like what questions he was asking me. Again, like resisting authority, just almost as
So classic, man. It's so classic. I mean,
ridiculous. um, but the next day, Chris said, "Well, this company, for various reasons, is not going to work out that I'm
Hmm.
working at right now. So I'm going to leave." And we hit it off. So let's, not without really saying it, it was like, well, should we do something together? And
Hmm.
we met up the next day. And the day after that, we started working together. It was like,
Wow.
clearly this feels right. So let's see where this
Hmm.
goes. And he had the seed of an idea, which was that he had just by chance bumped into a friend of his from middle school at Grand Central. And that friend had been making chemistry videos that were
Hmm.
really good. He was on YouTube making chemistry videos, and his comments section were just a shit show. YouTube comments today are incredible. Like I want
Oh
to
my
look at
gosh.
them, I
Yeah.
want to say
Yeah.
something funny or clever.
Super positive.
Not the case in 2013. It was a
No.
mess, a cesspool, um, for various reasons. But one of the specific problems was that people would ask the same question over and over. People would write answers that were unverified, like bad answers, and it was impossible for him to keep up with it. So there was this large group of people getting value out of these videos, but whenever you're learning, you're going to get stuck. You're going to need help on whatever it is you're trying to learn. And in that particular case, there was no way he was going to be able to help them. And there was like a part of a variant of that problem, which is the problem that from that moment until I left Socratic, until I left Google, that was the same problem that we were working
Hmm.
on.
Yeah.
Someone
No,
is trying to
100%.
learn something on their own. They're bringing their own problem, they're bringing their own context and institution, even. They're trying to learn something and they're stuck. What can we do about that? So it started off by trying to help these kids in the YouTube comments section. It turned into, can we curate the best videos that exist so you don't have to go hunting for random videos because there's so many bad
Hmm.
ones? Which morphed into very quickly, can we just have a general high quality Q&A platform for high school kids?
Hmm.
And then that, for very various practical business reasons, turned into, can we do this in an app? And can we make it so that we can answer every question, not just the one that a community has already answered? Like through various transformations, always trying to serve the same user in the same moment. Through very different solutions, we started with like this YouTube comments thing, and we ended up with, can we build an AI tutor?
Hmm.
And that's where you entered the picture.
Yeah, and it was interesting to like to my perspective of this was really fascinating because I was still very much like baby steps into my engineering career. I was sort of like I sort of like had molded my brain to Google Ads, which has a very regimented way of working where everything is sort of like parameterized and there's metrics for everything and there's like the entire process is masterfully laid out. And
Mm-hmm.
so I join in to the part of the story where these two things connect, where Google acquires Socratic. Um, and I guess maybe a month later, I don't, it was pretty recent that I joined that team,
Mm-hmm.
and left ads to join the team that was, and I think this was before I arrived, even like was already tasked with rebuilding the Socratic app, and to be powered with Google Tech, right? Um, and it was fascinating to me not only because it was a completely new environment in the sense that like, okay, we're building something that doesn't exist, there's no metrics for it, we're not exactly sure how we're going to do it,
Yeah.
and it was also culturally very different, right? There was a very special, and I think like I am very grateful that I got to see the Socratic team, and the dynamic there, um, but also a lot of longtime Google people. And so, balancing that was a situation that we all went through. And
Yeah.
and so, what was that like? So at this point, like tech means something, and I keep bringing it around this axis just to keep like a common thread around everything. So tech is now not just your job, but it's like the job's job. It's like you're a manager of managers in a all of a sudden gigantic bureaucracy. Um, Now you all of a sudden have to report to all of these different stakeholders, and you have to the way your demeanor is with people is modulated by the culture that you're in. Um, Man, what was that like? Let's get into it.
Yeah. I've just been writing about this. I have a "What I Learned at Google" blog post in the other tab. Um,
Hmm.
so I'll share that with you in the next
Yeah,
few
I'd love
days.
to read it.
Like I said, like takes me a while to digest what happened and why it happened
Yeah.
that way. And like while I'm in it, I'm like just operating on instinct and impulse, which is not the best way to operate necessarily, but that's how it went. A couple of interesting things about joining Google. One, we were siloed. We were shielded from the
We
rest,
were in a universe of our own. Yeah.
which was very fortunate because we did have some leeway to be ourselves and not get thrust right into complete domination by Google's culture. Google's
Hmm.
forces were there, but Socratic's forces were there too. And initially, we were kind of matched in number of people. And
Hmm.
we had a very clear, kind of unified view of what a team should feel like because we'd been doing that for 5 years together. And the Google side was a little bit more ragtag. They had been together for a while,
Yeah.
but they all had these other team histories and other cultural memories from Google. So they didn't
Hmm.
have a very clear unified front while we did. So in that game, in that like back and forth, we got to assert some of what the startup early stage Socratic culture was. And we learned that a lot of the Googlers appreciated that. They had been living a
Hmm.
certain way and working a certain way, and it was a little bit refreshing to be able to ask different questions and follow different instincts when you're building something. And Chris and I very much are like user driven product design thinkers where our instincts and our understanding of people matters as much as the numbers because actually in the early days you don't have all the numbers. You have to go off
Hmm.
what do you think people are like and what do you think
Hmm.
people reasonably want, and you build off of that understanding and you try to enrich that understanding by talking to people and by putting things out there, but that understanding comes a little bit later. You don't have the data up front to inform what you're going to build.
Hmm.
So that was kind of how we had to operate. And actually the Google experience was interesting because we had to rebuild this thing that we had already built. We had
Hmm.
to prove the lessons that we had already proven to ourselves. We had to prove them to another group so that we could all
Hmm.
rebuild this thing together. And it felt a little bit silly, a little bit like a waste, but also a good lesson that, you know, the world's not just going to believe what you have to say. Like, you can't just convince people just
Mm.
by telling them. Like, we thought we had something real figured out, and the Google scale, it was insignificant. It was kind of nothing.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so you did have to prove to these people that what you had figured out actually holds up in this new environment where you're like dealing with the whole world and not just with however many million users you have. Um, there were so many interesting things at the dynamics were so interesting. We had such a top heavy team, which
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
kind of like the inverted pyramid of what you ideally want
But
to
basically,
have.
what it was, yeah.
Some people making the decisions at the top level, and a lot of people who are doers, who are building things. And it was kind of the opposite. We had a lot of
You're a
leaders.
hundred. That's a great characterization of it. I hadn't thought about it that way, but
And
you're absolutely
that,
correct.
that's a hard ship to steer because everyone's trying to steer it in their own ways,
Right.
in their own directions, and they're not obviously clearly agreeing with each other on what direction they need
Hmm.
to go. So it
Hmm.
felt like a lot of the history of the team was like searching for a direction.
Right.
Um, and that's a challenging setup. So it took a while for the few directions that they did want to go in to emerge. It's like the top heavy thing was quite a challenge. I always had the challenge that I wanted to be an engineer, but that's
Mm.
not what the job called for.
Mm.
And I truly believe that incredible things are possible at Google if you play the Google game.
Yeah.
If you know what game you're playing, you understand the rules of that game, and you put your heart into playing that game, then you
Hmm.
can do some really incredible things.
Hmm.
That took me a while to understand. I was trying to play the game that I had previously played or be an
Mm.
engineer, and like that was not what the situation called for. And like
Hmm.
as I got warmed up into it and I started understanding how you play that game, more and more interesting things happened. But yeah, I mean, in any situation, you kind of have to know what game you're in and play the right one. And
Or yeah, or at least the game that the people that surround you think they're playing. So like even if you're not playing the same game, you have to be aware of the games that people around you are playing, um, to be able to advance in your own game. And I think that was the norm for all of us in the team. I think everybody was coming in with a slightly different angle on the project that we were building, but I do think that we were all very connected by the idea of 10xing education. Like what are some crazy ideas that we can have at Google scale for actually having a thesis around education. And I always thought that the Socratic rebuild was, all right, this is our first step to get momentum, and then we're going to start deploying stuff. And it was kind of prophetic too, right? The app launched in August 2019, and it crushed it. It did incredibly well, so that was cool to be a part of and see and celebrate. And then I can only imagine how well it did during the pandemic. I mean, like,
yeah,
I was gone for that for most of that, but um, I mean, we built that in the context of education being 100% remote and 100% in person, and and then the model was completely disrupted for the next 2 years. Um, so and I also like I have very dear memories of the time, and um, I felt very grateful that I was able to experience the side of Google that allowed itself to try stuff, and then also had my own frustrations when it was non-committal about some of these higher level theses. Um,
that is a
uh,
eternal challenge, I think, in education, where on the one hand you want to hire people on, or like team building and vision setting in education. Like on the one hand, you want to hire a bunch of people that care about learning and have their
mm,
own strong desire to change or improve how learning happens through technology. And you bring a bunch of those people together, and everyone has their own history with education. They have their own failures or successes or dreams that they're trying to build against. They have their own
Mm.
context, and they have their own ideas about what it takes to fix education. And we had a bunch of people who all had their own views for what it would take.
Mm.
Everyone had a slightly different degree of pragmatism or realism or experience with other things in the space. In that context, you have all this potential energy. It can go really well if there's a clear, singular, unifying direction that you're
Mhm.
building against, that people are willing to accept the trade-offs in, but they see the value in building that thing and they see why it can be great and how they can do it. If you can bring that together, it can be really great. But if the person setting the vision doesn't do it with sufficient conviction, then everyone has their own little questions and
Mhm.
direction. They all start pulling. Like you need a force that's going to like take all these forces in different directions and like point them in one. And
Mhm.
we didn't have that for a
Mhm.
while. And the Socratic rebuild was a part of that, but you kind of need somebody to pull everyone else
Mhm.
in a direction. And
No, totally.
they're
Go for
challenging
it.
in many spaces, but in education specifically, because everyone has history with it, and
Right.
everyone can look back.
Everyone's a consumer. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's, I remember the very different sensation. Like we went through all the stages in that team. Like, and I remember just how different the first offsite we did was at 1440 Multiversity,
Oh,
um,
yeah.
which was a great time. I had a wonderful time. I thought it
Yeah.
was awesome. We got into trouble, and then
We did. People can see
and
the
then
light in the dark. They can see it, and
I
there's a
know.
beacon.
Dang it.
We lit up a beacon. Oh my god.
Oh man. And then the second, I think, offsite in Santa Cruz, which was the offsite from hell, um, and just to I don't know,
Uh,
and it's I laugh at it now, but it was a very formative experience for me to not just have both, but the contrast, right?
mhm.
And to see like look at the things that were going on in the beginning that weren't going on at the end, or vice versa, um, and realizing, well, probably, like, I don't want to dwell into this because I'm excited to get to the current chapter, but there was something there that I would be curious to hear your thoughts on. You have this very strong thesis about what a team feels like, but at Google you surrender all your hiring decisions to somebody else, and so all of a sudden the composition of the team isn't up to you anymore, or fully up to you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. When I was thinking about what is the difference between that first offsite and the second offsite, and a lot of the differences come down to the people and the dynamics between the people, and some of it I realized in that journey is like when there was a bunch of tension, and the initial
Hmm.
thesis was that some people just don't like other people, and
Hmm.
that was not exactly right. It felt like the later realization was that people didn't have a lot of clarity around what they were responsible for and what the boundaries were. So they didn't know, again, in like the what game are they playing? They didn't know what game they were supposed
Hmm.
to be playing, or if it matched, or were they like playing different games, or were they all on the same team trying to do the same thing? And like there were a lot of ill-defined boundaries and ill-defined expectations that led to a bunch of conflict that was quite solvable, and it did get solved once that was the realization. That was one big part of what felt different. The other thing that felt different was in the beginning, it's you have a bunch of dreamers. You've hired a bunch of
Hmm.
dreamers. Everyone has
Hmm.
dreams, and it's exciting. But then you do need to settle on one thing that you're doing. And the the people who were best at sketching out a unifying vision with some internal conviction were not the ones who were setting the direction of the team. And
Hmm.
so the team still, like, there was the potential that we could all be moving towards one thing, but we weren't moving towards one thing. And in the beginning, you don't know that's how it's going to end up. And a year later, it's kind of clear that that's where it's heading. It's not all heading in this one direction that we all believe in. And yeah, like a lot of dreams were either set aside. I don't know if they were shattered because you're still dreaming that you could do it in the future, but some dreams were set aside, or like now you're doing this thing that's not really anyone's strong, clear dream, but you're doing it because it
Hmm.
sort of makes practical sense.
No,
Galileo,
it was.
yeah.
I think it was like an incredibly formative experience in so many ways. In terms of, it was my first like time being responsible for somebody else's work. It was a new type of work. It was way more cross functional than I had ever worked before. Tightly coupled with product and design, and it was an incredibly rewarding, and I'm very grateful for that experience. And then pandemic hits, the world reconfigures, it catches us in this state. So then I think, okay, maybe it's time for me to find something new to do.
Mhm.
And a few months later, it was time. It was time for you to find something new to do. This was maybe, can't imagine it was more than 6 months after I left that you also decided to start your new journey.
Yeah, yeah. I had a clear end date in my mind almost when I joined, which is
Hmm.
like, um, yeah, like they
I have a guess.
it wasn't that. It's actually it was 70% of that. It's like they're gonna.
That's so fascinating.
That's kind of just how I think that's my internal default calculation. Is like I'm not a maximizer or like an
Hmm.
optimizer in that way. Like we're getting paid out over 4 years. That's 8 payments. 5 out of 8 feels fine, sufficient. I don't need to go for 8. That's going waiting. Yeah, that's too far.
Just being greedy. Yeah.
If you love it, you can stay past the 8, which there's an other version of me that knew which game to play and played it well and liked it, etc. Like
Hmm.
different brain chemistry, I might still be there because there's a
Hmm.
lot
Totally.
that's great about that setup. Um, but the way I am, it's like 5/8 sounds right, and I knew what date that would be. It's like I know I'm going to leave then, and
Thank you
and
very
that,
much. On to
huh?
and so and it's, I mean, and I'm excited to talk about um, Maven, because it's sort of like this refinement over all these instances of your contributions to education and online education, and sort of like, I think that and also just the history of online education, from like Khan Academy to MOOCs to, it went through these blobs and phases, the master classes of the world, and now I think like your thesis is, I think, a lot, I think, has a compelling drive that uses that social capital, to encourage people to actually follow through with their commitments, which is a huge problem in online learning, right? Okay, but like, let's hear about the inception of Maven, uh,
Yeah.
idea wise, founder wise, and then let's try and see if like we could get to fundraising wise.
Um, I left Google not knowing what I was going to be doing, but knowing that if I could, I would stay in the education space. Like maybe 6 months before that, I took some time off to think about wildly different spaces that I could get into. Um, and like kind of largely spent my time thinking about the 3D web and like
Hmm.
shared experiences on the 3D web. Like I still love that idea,
I
and
remember.
it's happening now quite a lot.
Yeah.
Like great 3D experiences in your browser that other people are a part of. And I remember feeling that like a little bit sad that my mom and dad have never explored a virtual world and like walked
Hmm.
around in this like fantastical thing, and that I can't just like go for a walk in a garden with her right now. Like that would
Hmm.
be really nice. Or like go back to the sports club that we spent my entire childhood in. Like wouldn't it be cool if we could go for a walk there and sit down by the lake? And that's where we had our morning conversation. So there are
Hmm.
all these things that like the 3D web is pretty exciting to me, was exciting to me, and I spent some time exploring it. And various reasons. One, there was no obvious problem to solve or thing to build, or like there wasn't something pulling me towards it. And like I still kind of feel like that's in my future where I find the
Hmm.
right thing to do in that space. And two, I didn't know other people who shared
Hmm.
that enthusiasm. And so it's still back there. I'm still waiting to find the people and the problems, and like it might end up happening at some point. Um, but I knew largely that there were still huge problems to solve in education. And some of the things that we did with Socratic that didn't quite work out, that it felt like a slight variation of the problem, or like a different setup, might lead to something interesting. One of them was Socratic was largely for people in today's existing institutions. And
Hmm.
a lot of those institutions aren't very efficient. They're not necessarily teaching you the right thing at the right time. They're quite rigid. And doing a 12 plus 4 years of learning so you can get to this thing doesn't feel like the right way to learn the things you need to learn today. So piggybacking piggybacking off of existing institutions didn't feel like the way to go, and I would rather work on building our own institution that's an alternate. That was one big part of it. Um, and the other big part of it, well, very closely connected to that, is there are a lot of skills you need to get the job. And like I took on more of like a employment lens on it. Earlier it was more
Hmm.
of like a general learning lens. Like people want to learn physics and,
Scholastic. Yeah.
yeah, scholastic, institution focused scholastic education versus like practical employment focused learning that was
Hmm.
free of any of the existing institutions. It was independent of it. It was much more based on like, do you have a skill or do you not? And what are the
Hmm.
skills people want to acquire that'll help them get a job, that'll help them make money, that'll give them the freedom to do whatever the hell else they want to do in life. And the set of people and the set of situations I was trying to solve for kind of morphed into that. Felt much
Hmm.
more grounded, felt much more practical. It felt much freer because you didn't have to deal with all the
Hmm.
institutional challenges, and you could focus on a much more practical set of participants. Somebody who's trying to get a job and an employer who's trying to figure out if this person has the skill. And the
Hmm.
more
And
people with
and
more skills, the more these matches end up happening and the more good things get made in the world.
and also a very measurable objective.
Very
So if you're
measurable.
in this and you're in the space of job offer versus not job offer, or even like job offer with how many dollar signs, um, you have an idea of the economic and societal impact that you're creating. Whereas in
Yeah.
the other world, it's much harder to have the real. It's further upstream. Like you could think of like maybe this will help somebody someday, but you're many layers away from the actual moment of measurement of that value.
Yeah.
Um,
And at Socratic, we were also dealing with like maybe the most challenging age group in a sense. Well, challenging in a particular sense. We were dealing with middle schoolers and high schoolers. We're already deep into the institutional learning
mm,
world. But so it's too late for some earlier interventions that could radically change how you approach learning. And it's too early for the more practical things, like things that'll help you get the job or the skill that'll
Mm,
help you do better at your job, because you're not in the job context yet. You're learning in like this kind of context free, reason free, not like purpose free environment where it's just like you're learning because you got to get through these tests and learn these subjects, so you can get to the next step in your educational journey. So we decided like, so I think the choice was either go earlier and work on the earlier interventions that could really change the direction of your life, or to go a little bit later where it's more about, can you learn very practical skills at the right time in the efficient way that'll help you do the thing you're already trying to do better. um,
mhm,
so those are some of like the raw materials in my mind for what I was looking to do next. And again, it was kind of serendipitous. The right person showed up at the right time
mm,
that unlocked it. um, my co-founder Gagan had been on his own journey to end up at wanting to build this CBC, like a way for people to create CBCs. Because he had just taken some. He was like, this is really powerful, very efficient, way more engaging. I want more of this.
mm.
And let me see if I can make that happen. And he tweeted that he was looking to work with someone. And I messaged him. And that was it.
Wow.
Just
Wow. That's incredible.
perfectly timed. Like 1 month after I left Google, we started talking, realized that this had a lot of the characteristics that I wanted. And this was another chance to build a team and to build
Hmm,
like the 5 years of working at on Socratic as an independent company were my favorite work years.
hmm,
At that point, like being free to build the team, to build the company, to do the things you wanted to do, to make your own choices, to design what every day or week felt like who you're going to be doing it with, what space are you going to be doing it in, how are you, like what energy are you bringing to your work, what is the purpose of what you're doing, like being able to shape all of that, and
hmm,
then to be able to build something really great with a small group of people, like the best work years that I had had up till that point, and the chance to do that again on a thing that made much more practical sense.
hmm,
um, Socratic, as great as it is, made less practical sense as a business. It was never a
mhm,
business. But this clearly had the makings of a great big business that solved a very important
mhm,
problem for a lot of people. Uh, Felt like a natural continuation in a much more sensible and potentially bigger way, like much more
mhm.
open for where it could go, like how big it could be. And yeah, that's where things are.
That's so cool. And so, what's the latest with Maven? So, what is the problem set that is on your mind, as you are, trying to get it to the next level, trying to. I mean, I know that you've relocated at least 3 times, if not more. No, way more in the past 3 years. Um,
Well, yeah, a lot of there's a time where we're all relocating a lot.
yeah, yeah, that's true.
Everyone. Spend 2 months here, 2 months there, but New York has always been kind of the obvious place to be because that's where
Mm,
all the people we know are.
mm, mhm,
A place where you could see 50 different people in a week that you know, like
mm.
15 of them who you've known or 20 of them who you've known for 10 years.
Yeah,
It's like
all
a
the difference. It makes all the difference.
yeah. You can walk around and bump into people at the coffee shop or on the street, and it happens a lot. So yeah, New York was obviously going to be the place. Where we are as a company, we are we've been through a bunch of shifts which don't particularly matter, but where we are now is we're building a marketplace where experts who have done things in the like real world practitioners and experts will teach the things they know to other people who want to learn those things. And they
Mm,
can design the courses however they want, but they tend to be anywhere from 2 days to 2 weeks, kind of like efficient, packed learning experiences with other people, where there's the teacher in the room who you can talk to, and a bunch of peers who you can show your work to, you can ask questions with, you can share experiences with, and a bunch of great curated content that you go through together.
Mm.
Kind of like a college class. So, like, a lot of
Yeah,
this,
like assigned readings. Yeah.
yeah, a lot of this has been figured out. It's not like a magical new revolutionary experience. What's revolutionary about it is that the people teaching it are different. A lot of the structures that define the college experience that don't necessarily need to be there, like 4 years at once, costing a
Mm.
bunch of money, where you buy it as a package and you take it one after the other. Like, those things go away. What's left is you learning things from credible people with other people that care about it, in a setting that engages you and encourages you to actually finish it. Pretty
Mm.
simple
Hmm.
at its core. But what makes it hard is kind of everything about it. All of it's new. The people who are going to teach it, most of them don't
Haven't
know
done
that
it before. Yeah.
they haven't done it before. They don't even know it's an option for them. The people who are going to take it also don't know it's an option for them, or what they could learn,
Mm.
or don't have the culture of continual learning, like, as a
Mm.
part of how they are in their professional life. Because most people expect that they'll learn most things on the job, or
Hmm.
very informally, by reading a blog post,
Mm.
by watching a video. There's something else that's short of going back to school. So there's, like, either the loose, slow, informal stuff, or there's the
Mm.
heavy, big life decision, expensive stuff like go to school. And there's a
Mm.
big gap in between those, where there's slightly more structured experiences
Mm.
involving other people with a little bit more commitment, but still short enough that you could do multiple in a year, that you could pick them based on the topic, pick them based on your schedule and do them when you want, roughly.
Mm. Mm.
So, like, much more bite-sized but deep learning experiences that happen at various points in your professional journey or in your personal journey. It's like this space that most people aren't actively participating in,
Mm.
but a lot of people want to, for various reasons. There's like a lot of practical good reasons, and there's a lot of social good reasons to do it. So that's the world. That's like the space of education that we're trying to unlock. But all of it's new. What should courses in this
Mm.
space feel like? There's a lot of
Mm.
default take, but that'll get you to a good experience. But how do you make it great? How do you get
Mm.
projects in this space to work really well, or peer feedback to work really well?
Mm.
Pretty hard thing to do, to get people to care about giving each other feedback. So, like, how do you make that happen in a light
Mm.
way? How do you make it so that these people who are real world practitioners who are still doing those jobs, how do you make it so that it's worthwhile for them to teach it and it's not too burdensome?
Mm.
It's still a rich learning experience for the student. So how do you make it easier for
Right.
the instructor to not have to repeat themselves, but to be involved at the right moments? And there's a lot that tech can do to make this stuff better. Um,
Mm.
like, not even very complex tech though. Like, this whole new world of LLMs can do a whole bunch
Oh
more.
yeah.
Um, but education's always kind of suffered from not having really great product designers building things,
Mm.
or and selling them to the end user, because there's like this big problem in education where the buyer is not the user, and the
Mm.
things get bought because they satisfy a bunch of institutional needs, not necessarily
Mm.
because they solve the end user, the learner's needs, the best way. But in this world, we have the opportunity to deal directly with the learners,
Mm.
and still make great products, and make great products for them. So that's kind of all over the place. But
Mhm.
that's the world we're
No, no,
in.
no. That.
Bringing a marketplace together is pretty hard on its own. Like, which
Yeah.
side do you focus on when? How do you maintain quality? How do you think about
Mm.
quality? Big question around how open should it be versus how curated and closed should it be.
Mm.
How do you let serendipity happen? How do you let unexpected great things crop up through the
Mm,
community while still maintaining some bar of quality? How do you encourage
hmm
in particular areas that you wish could be the early clusters because they make a lot of sense, but still have the random other things sprout up and
mm,
still receive some attention? So like all the marketplace dynamics
hmm
are challenging and fun to think through, and explaining what this is to the world and getting all the participants to know about it and to be convinced that this is a place where they should put their effort and attention. That's another challenge, and then building a great
hmm
in the middle of it. So like, yeah, the instructor
No,
side.
it's a lot on your plate, man. Yeah, it's a lot
It's
of
not all on my plate, which is
knobs.
a great thing. It's like you build a great team
Yeah.
and you share the load wonderfully, and it
No, no,
doesn't
no,
feel
and
that hard.
totally, it's meaningful, and you're working in lockstep towards something, and you're sort of like it's a much more personal way of working. I think it's a you really tie your identity to the work and to the people that you're working with, and so um, you make some concessions, and you get a lot of meaning out of that. And um, oh, I was going to ask, what types of skills are you mainly hosting now, hoping to host now?
Yeah. Right now we're focused on tech business careers and
Hmm,
on kind of the mid-career person.
hmm,
So you've been doing something for 3 to 5 years or three to
hmm,
10 years, and you want to do it better, or you want to do it at the next level, or you want to
hmm,
do something adjacent to it. And a lot of people fall into all those buckets.
hmm,
Uh, and the main ways those people learn are either on the job slowly, or they go back to school.
hmm,
Um, and so there's a large group of people that if they want to be better at what they're doing, and there's no obvious partner for them that's going to help them get better at what they're doing, and we
hmm,
can be that partner.
hmm. I see. So I'm picturing somebody. I'm picturing somebody who's in an engineering job for 3 or 4 years, and they're developing a skill set in, let's say, for example, if you're at Google, something that is very Google centric. Oh, Google. Sorry, Google. um, uh, Something that is very like I don't know, like a niche type of technology. You're really good at compilers, or you're really good at some to form or another. But if you want to have a toy project of your own, or if you want to, or thinking of starting something, or if you're thinking of taking a new job that requires front end development, I mean, you really don't have the experience or the reps to know what front end development looks like until you go through something like this, right? Or you somehow figure out a way to make your own curriculum and remain you know um, disciplined enough to see through the entirety of the thing. And even still, you don't get the third party objective verification of your skills, right? Um, so is this accurate? Like somebody who like maybe I want to learn React for a new job.
Slightly,
Uh,
slightly less on the uh, computer science or programming, in slightly less in that realm at the moment. The
hmm.
the example that we've been around a bunch that we do have courses on is like you've been an IC engineer for a while, and
Hmm.
you either just got promoted to manager, or you're not sure if it's right for you, or you're about yeah, you just got promoted
Mm.
to manager, you were an IC. It's a very different job. It's the next step
Yeah,
in
totally.
some sense, but a completely different job. You've started doing it, and it's tough. how do you quickly learn how to be a good manager? How do you quickly
Mm.
learn what it means to lead a team? What, like, you're playing a new game now? How can you learn what that game is about, and how who can you talk to that has been there, that has done it, that can help you in that journey? So in that case,
Mm.
not a well-defined curriculum. There's some general things that everyone who goes from IC to manager should learn, and the curriculum will have that. And then there's your specific situation that you want to ask about, and you want to talk to other people that are going through it. And
Mhm.
that kind of scenario is a very common one, and we have great courses for that. So there's a lot of
Mm.
courses around, like, so we largely focus on the non-programming tech and business job world. So like
Hmm.
product management or
Soft
design,
skills. Yeah.
marketing, sales, leadership, finance. There's a lot of competition in the tech world. That's one part of it. But the other part of it is that you need specific kind of tooling for a lot of, like, if you're going to learn React, you need a whole other set of, you need a programming environment.
Mm.
Like
Totally. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
a
It's
world where,
yeah.
and the group learning part of it doesn't matter as much.
Oh,
You
that's
don't,
true.
you're, yeah, so it's, yeah.
Or even like I think at thinking about what LLMs can do, like even if I've always thought the community value of computer science is like getting unstuck. Somebody knows
Yeah.
how, somebody catches the bug, but with LLMs, I mean, a lot of that goes away. Um,
Yeah. But we have a ton of courses on what to do with LLMs, or how to think about
oh,
product building in the context of AI, or
mm,
how to use AI design tools. Like, there's a lot of stuff that's pretty new, that
oh yeah,
it's not just a matter of like how to practically use it. It's like what kinds of problems to solve with it, how to
it's
reconfigure your mind to know what you can do in this new world. There are a lot of courses in that space that we've got.
oh, I'm excited to check it out. Yeah, yeah. Let's call it. This is Franz.
Good
Thank you so
chatting with
much,
you.
man. I really
Nice
appreciated
catch up.
this. Yeah, this is great, man.
Oh,
I
it was a
appreciate it.
one-sided catch-up because I have a lot of questions for you, but we'll get into that at
Oh yeah,
another point.
yeah. We can do it. We can do another episode in a few months.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I want to hear about what you've been
Um,
doing and thinking about, and you've been on a whole journey. And yeah,
definitely.
what's
Yeah,
that?
I'm excited to share. I'm actually really excited to share. All
Yeah,
right, man. I'll let you go, but this has been
cool.
awesome.
Thank you so much.
See you, sir. Yeah, you got it. Bye.